So we're going to continue on with our control structures, and we're going to talk about loops. And there's a couple of different kinds of loops. Loops just cause your code to repeat over and over again. We're going to talk about a for loop and a while loop. Okay, so a for loop iterates a certain number of times, whereas a while loop iterates so long as some sort of condition is true. I'm going to give you a little story of a little robot. Suppose we're coding a robot to walk around in the room, and we have a command that will allow it to take a step. Well, we could put that one little step into a for loop that says execute this code 10 times, and that would allow our little robot to take 10 little steps. And so that would be kind of an example of a for loop. You know how many times you want him to walk to take a step. We know how many times it's going to iterate, so we're going to use a for loop. Now suppose you wanted our little robot to walk until he hits a wall. Maybe he's going through a maze or something. Well, we don't know how many steps that's going to take, so we're going to use a while loop in that particular condition. We're going to say keep stepping until you come across some sort of barrier to block you. And that would be an example of a while loop. Okay, so for loop and while loop are your two basic kinds. Now you can also change that to a pretest or a post-test loop. A pretest tests first and then executes the code. So a for loop is always a pretest loop. When you say it's going to go 10 times, it's going to go 10 times. But a while loop can either be a pretest loop or a post-test loop. And it depends on where you put the condition. So if you flip it upside down and put the condition after the body of the code, it becomes a do while loop, a test at the bottom. And let's show you an example of this. This kind of sounds really vague and confusing. So first let's give you an example of a for loop. A for loop here's a for loop. The reason it's called a for loop is you have this keyword for, and then any code you put inside of here will execute this number of times. In this situation it's 10 times, and the reason why is because we initialize a variable. In this case we call it I and set it equal to 0. Then we stick it into a sort of test. So long as this test is true, it's going to run this code. In this case 0 is less than 10, so it's going to run this code. And the last thing is the change. How much is your variable going to change by? In this case, it's counting up by ones. So this loop is going to iterate from 0 to 9, which is 10 times. Now the change doesn't always have to be by ones. You could say I plus equals 2. In that case, if we were to have the same for loop with I plus equals 2, it would only execute 5 times because it would count 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And so it's not going to go up by ones. You could also make it count down. If you make it count down, then you have to start with a value bigger and a value smaller over here. So we'd have to switch this from like 10 to 0 or 100 to 90. So long as this value is larger than this value if you're counting down. But you also have to change the sign. If you're counting down, you're going to use a greater than, not a less than. Alright, so that is an example of a for loop. A while loop, yes, you're going to look at this and say, Mrs. Murphy, that is not a while loop. That's an if statement. I know if statements because you showed us in the last video. Yes, it's an if statement. But I wanted to show you a really secret. So I'm going to talk about this if statement, and then we're going to flip this and do a magic trick and change it into a while loop. So here I have a variable count. And if count is less than 5, which it is because count is 0, it's going to print out count is 0. And then it's going to do a count plus plus, and then it's done. Right? Because we've done if statements before, and that's what if statements do. But look at the syntax. We've got if, we've got a condition, we've got brackets and some code. Now I'm going to click and show you a while loop. And all I'm going to do is change that word if to the word while. It's the same exact syntax. The only difference is how it behaves. In this particular situation, count is 0. This is a true statement. It prints out 0. Count becomes 1. Then it's going to go back and test again. Is 1 less than 5? Yes, it is. So it's going to print out 1. Becomes 2. 2 is less than 5. Prints out 2. Becomes 3. 3 is less than 5. Prints out 3. becomes 4. 4 is less than 5, prints out 4, becomes 5. 5 is not less than 5, so this is where it falls out of the loop and comes and executes whatever's left. So it's the same as an if statement, only it continues iterating through this code so long as it's true. Now suppose I didn't have this count plus plus. Think of what would happen. Count's always going to stay 0. 0 is always less than 5. You're going to be stuck in an infinite loop. So watch out for these infinite loops. If your program appears to freeze, check your code. You might have an infinite loop in there. Alright, so that is a while loop. Okay, so let's show you a do while loop. And once again, I'm doing this funky magic trick to show you the syntax is very similar. I'm going to start off with a while loop and I'm going to flip it upside down. And I'm going to do that by taking that and cutting that while loop out and pasting it to the bottom and replacing it with the keyword do. So a do while loop actually has the word do in there and while at the bottom. And it does have the condition, that no condition first. The condition is at the bottom, and that's how you know it's a post-test loop, because the condition is post the code, I guess. I don't know, after the code. Doesn't post mean after? Anyway, so let's show you how this works. Actually, let's not, because it's exactly the same. It behaves the exact same way. Count to 0, prints out 0, count plus plus. So you're saying, if it behaves exactly the same, why in the heck do you have two different ways of doing it? Well, let's show you. I'm going to go back to show you. I'm going back to a while loop to show you this. In this particular situation, suppose our count were 15. 15 less than 5? No, that's a false statement, so it's going to skip all of this code and it's never going to run this code at all. Now fast forward a couple of slides. I'm going back to my post-test loop. We're pretending this count is 15 again. There's nothing stopping it. It's executing this at least one time. It's going to print out 15. It's going to become count plus plus, which becomes 16. Then it's going to test, and this is a false statement, so it's not going to repeat. So a do while loop executes at least one time, even if the condition is false. That is the difference between a post-test and a pre-test. Okay, break statement. We've done break statements in our switch statement before. We used them to break out and end each of the cases, but you can also use them in loops. So here I have a test at the bottom loop, so it's going to run this code and it's going to print out, do you want to do rock, paper, or scissors, or -1 to quit? And then they enter in their choice. Well, if the choice equals a -1, it's going to break. It's going to skip this statement. It's not even going to execute any more statements inside the loop. It's going to just jump to after the loop ends. And so that's another way of getting out of a loop, is by putting an if statement in that uses a break command to break it out of another set of parentheses. Okay, so that is the very, very scaled down Dr. Seuss version of control structures. We will go more in depth when we get to class next time. We will see you next time.